Hey guys, so today we're going to be talking about reinforcing. Now, I don't think I've talked about this yet, and that's because I didn't have any good information to share about what buffs apply when, and when we don't really know what's going on, there's not really any point in discussing it until we can figure it out. So I've avoided the topic for a while, but there has been a breakthrough in the research in that field. I'm sure most of y'all have already read Evony's video on reinforcing and how what applies when. But I'll just summarize what he found really quick. So the biggest thing he found was that defensive generals, as in like the generals you put on your wall, like Boudica and whatnot, their buffs do apply when you're reinforcing. So that was the biggest discussion. The second thing he discovered is that Iden and the other general that their wording sounds like they're for reinforcing, they don't work when they're reinforcing. So that was surprising. And then the other one, which a lot of people assumed, myself, I was not convinced of this last one from what I'd seen from mine, but apparently my assumption was wrong, is that the when attacking clause does not apply inside the main city, and the leading clause does. Now, you might be surprised why I was skeptical on this claim, and that's because the when attacking clause does apply in battlefield buildings when you're on a farm and someone attacks it. In those situations, it does. Ones that you would assume aren't attacking. So I had a suspicion that it might be a bug or something, but apparently it does work when reinforcing. So that is good information. Now, with those caveats out of the way, I've gone through the three main troop types: ground, ranged, and mounted. I haven't done siege, but if y'all are interested in that, I can do a video on that. But that one probably wouldn't be as important because the siege options we have aren't very good, and especially not for the free-to-play player. So I'm not covering those. But we're going to look at those three main categories. What we're not going to look at is reinforcing with mixed troops. If you want to do a mixed troop reinforce, you're probably better off using one of the wall generals as your main. Just choose a wall general that's good for that. We're not going to be looking at the debuffs. That's just too much to throw into the calculations to figure out what's the most optimal strategy. And you can also just throw an assistant that's a mayor to get a good bit of debuffs. And debuffs from other people's marches that are reinforcing, or the main city keeps sub-cities. It's just very niche when you're going to want to use debuffs, so we're not going to cover that. We're just looking at the raw basic numbers. So with that explanation of what we're going to do today, let's jump right into it. First, because I have them pulled up, I guess let's look at the ground. Now, I've gone through here and I've added a D to all the ones that can be used for reinforcing. And then you'll see here I have a negative 10A. That means from the totals, just take 10 off of the attack for this general, because one of his buffs has a clause for marching. This one down here, there's no negative. That's because Robert the Bruce has a clause that says when in-city attack and HP, 25 for each, which confused me for a long time when I originally went through the numbers. But now that we know in-city buffs work when reinforcing, it makes a lot more sense, and it does make Robert the Bruce a little bit more viable. Now, the options you're going to have as a free player for the defenders for ground: Trajan, Oda, Solt, Peter, and Robert. And then I threw Richard the Lion in here because I wanted to compare one defensive general, wall general, with the rest of the ones, just to get a general idea of how they perform. And the only other tavern general for the wall that was geared towards ground is James Bowie, and he's just very bad as a defensive general, so we're just going to look at Richard the Lionheart instead. Let me delete that, and y'all remind me not to save this, because that'll destroy a lot of data, and I will cry. So now with that out of the way, we can sort these. If we're looking on straight attack, Sween's the highest for your defensive attack. Richard's going to be the lowest. That's pretty much expected. For the free generals, Solt comes in pretty high with 307. And Peter the Great pretty low. Defensively, Frigg is up top, Sween is a close second, and Salt is the highest for the free ones. HP, Frigg again, Sween is a little bit further down here. We got Trajan up pretty high, and Salt drops down a little bit. We got to consider the march size with this as well because it's going to affect how many troops you can get into there. So the effective attack is going to be important for this calculation as well. That's one area where the true wall generals are going to suffer is because they have 0 march size because they're not really made for marching. So there's that. Highest overall for march size, Trajan. Emponitis coming in nice 14. Robert the Bruce has 14. This calculator right here is, yes, it is a K40 March 2000% buff, tier 15 troop. Looking at the effective attack, Sween comes in top, Frigg is a close second, Trajan comes out for the top for the free generals, and Robert the Bruce comes down here at 40. Now, we do need to consider that Sween has a negative 10 attack, so that's not really going to change this that much. It's just going to be very little. Here, let me actually drop 10 attack off of him and we can show that. Yeah, it drops it by like 2 billion, so not too bad. But let's see, this is more interesting. Let's add the defense and HP to Robert the Bruce. Is that calibration done? That puts Robert the Bruce right below Trajan, so that does move Robert the Bruce from being completely worthless to a very niche situation where he could be useful. If we compare the defenses, Trajan wins. HP is the same. So, you know, Trajan is still probably the better choice. However, Robert the Bruce has higher attack and the march size is a little bit lower, so for your lower level keeps, if you're looking at like a K35, a K33, Robert the Bruce will actually probably give you better results, but that's going to be very conditional just for the reinforcing, so I would still recommend Trajan over Robert the Bruce. As far as the premium generals that we have, looks like either Frigg or Sween would be the best option. Frigg has better survivability. Sween is just slightly better in attack, so I'd probably recommend Frigg as the better defender. But honestly, any of these premiums here would work. So I think that's a pretty good overview of the ground general. For the assistant side, you're going to be looking at using some of the same generals. Nothing too crazy. Just pick one that has the leading clause. It's not going to be a huge deal. Just pick one that's good as an assistant. You can look at my spreadsheets. They're all on it, and you'll have a solid choice. Don't save. Alright, now let's look at the ranged troops. Let's take off these numbers right here so we can look at it a little bit more fairly real quick. This one right here is important. Winfield Scott, he loses 35% attack whenever he is defending, or reinforcing, I should say, so that is a pretty big deal for him. I'd never really read into his skill to depth with the wording for that stuff, so that is very unfortunate. I'm not sure why they would do that to him. It seems kind of, it's kind of fucked up, man. Okay, with that calibrated, let's check this shit out. We got same march as before, K40, 2000% buff, pretty high march. Let's look at the attack overall. Got Sigurd in top, which is the new general. Previous video, I did recommend Ragnar over Sigurd because Sigurd is a lot harder to fully max out than Ragnar is due to some of the nuances with him. But Ragnar is not a defending general, so Sigurd does have that advantage, so it is a little bit, balances that out in the end. Louis the Ninth is also here. Not nearly as high tech, but decent. Minomoto, the one everyone loves, and we're going to talk about that in a second. Let's look at the defense. Yeah, defense for archers is pretty poor around the board, so nothing too crazy. Louis the Ninth does have nice defense, though. Sigurd and Subutai, pretty much the premium generals, have pretty high defense, but that's about it. Looking at HP, Sigurd once again up high, so he's going to be very survivable for it. And Godfrey as well. That reminds me, Godfrey right here has a question mark. That's because with some of the way his specialty reads, not his specialty, excuse me, his covenant reads, some of the clauses say defending and not in city. And when Aka did his video, he said they weren't able to test Godfrey, so we're not going to talk about Godfrey too much. With those stats, we're not going to factor those in, but they may or may not work when you're reinforcing. So do keep that in mind with these numbers. He probably will perform a little bit better than this spreadsheet, but I'm not going to include numbers that we're not sure of. Let's look at the total attack. Looking at the total attack, Sigurd comes in top. Second place to Godfrey. Godfrey's a good bit behind Sigurd, so it is a pretty big difference. Subutai and Louis IX pretty much up there with Godfrey, so any of these are going to be pretty good reinforcing generals. The best option you have for a free player for reinforcing is still Winfield Scott. He still does better damage than Minamoto. Let's compare their HP and defense as well. About the same for defense. HP, yeah, Minamoto has about 30% more HP, but it's a ranged march, so we're not really concerned about HP as much. The big difference is Minamoto has higher attack by about 60%, but Winfield Scott has that 20% march size. Now, I still recommend Winfield Scott over Minamoto in every situation for reinforcing, for attacking, and here's why. So when we're looking at these numbers here, Winfield Scott and Minamoto, Scott has a slight advantage. It's not huge. You're probably not going to notice a difference. At lower levels, Minamoto is going to perform better. But when we're looking at attacking, and when we give Winfield Scott that 35 attack back, let's throw this back up to 50. Let's see what that number does. It goes up to 50 billion. So he's outclassing him by a good bit when you consider that. So he does better on the attack than Minamoto. And the defense, it's pretty much equal. Either one is going to work equally efficiently. So, yeah, I don't really see any reason to use Minomoto over Winfield Scott. Talking about Zachary Taylor, he has pretty solid stats across the board. Nothing super special. His damage is kind of low. So if you're going for a specialty archer march, probably not use him. But if you want more of a mixed march with an emphasis on archers, then yeah, Zachary Taylor is probably going to be a pretty solid option for that. But I would only really recommend that when you're using more than 2 or 3 categories of troops. Other than that, you're better using a specialist for this. Okay, calibrated calculator for the mounted. Once again, K40 March, 2000% buff, tier 15 troop. Let's just jump straight into the increased attack stat. When we look at the attack, we have some pretty good defensive reinforcing generals for the mounted. Washington Prime, once again, top tier. So this is another big advantage for Washington Prime over Napoleon Prime, is that he can be used as a reinforcing general. He's absolutely the best mounted general, so this is just the cherry on top for Washington Prime. Andre, very solid. So if you have Andre, he's very good for reinforcing. As a overall mounted general for attacking, he's still very good. Doesn't keep up with Napoleon Prime, but nothing to sneeze at. Loudon, pretty decent damage overall. HP and defense are they're all right. They're not terrible. I'm gonna point this out because Loudon is in the Trial of Knights, and the other one you can get from Trial of Knights is Polygenus. Polygenus is slightly better than Loudon, but they are pretty close. With the fact that Loudon can be used to reinforce now, he probably has a slight edge over Polygenus in their overall utility, so I would definitely consider him if you're a free player and you're looking for someone to reinforce. We got Martinus in here, which he's got pretty decent damage, not as much as the premiums, but pretty respectable. Now, let's talk about Martinus real quick, because people are going to say Martinus is the GOAT now because he can be used for reinforcing and Roland can't. Well, I'm going to point this out because I know most of y'all have a Boudica that's fully maxed out, and she does have her uses. This is another use for her. Definitely don't use her for T1 trap, for buffing the T1 troops. She's more built towards higher level mounted troops, which you would be using in reinforcing. So keep that in mind. But let's compare her stats to Martinus. Martinus and Boudica, uh, Martinus has about 60% extra attack. Boudica has about 70% extra HP, and then about 100% extra. 100% extra HP and 70% extra defense, excuse me. Neither of them have any march size. The damage difference is significant, 60 billion and 70 billion, but it's not crazy severe, and when you consider the fact that Boudica has a ton more defensive stats than Martinus, I would definitely say she is the better reinforcer for the mounted specifically, and she's also going to move out a bunch of the other troops as well, so that's another advantage. So if you're wanting to use Martinus for reinforcing and you have a Boudica, Boudica's the better reinforcer, honestly. That does give Martinus some use for free players if you're looking for specifically a mounted general that can reinforce, but as pointed out earlier, you also have Laudon, and Martinus, he doesn't pop up in the tavern very often. He's 60 million gold when you get him, so he's very hard for a free player, and he's not as easy as the other tavern generals, and we do have other options that are available. Can't forget about Minomoto. He's not as good as Boudica is, but if you already have him, he's pretty solid. He suffers defensively compared to the overall stats, but nothing to sneeze at. So yeah, he is an option, and he does have a 6% march size. Alright, so that's all I got for today. To summarize what we said, if you're looking for a ground general for reinforcing, for Tavern, you're probably best with Trajan. For the ranged troops, Winfield Scott is going to be your best reinforcer from the Tavern. For the mounted troops, Martinus technically is the best from the Tavern. However, you do have better options from the Trial of Knights. You could use Laudon. If you have Boudica, she also is better. So you do have other options. It's not just Martinus, and they can be used for other things as well. So that is the summary of the reinforcing generals. If you have any other questions about it, or if you want a video analyzing a specific type of reinforcement march, or just something else in general, leave a comment, like, subscribe, all that stuff, and I'll catch y'all later.